Hello Info-Person, this is Anton, and today we're going to be discussing eternal fire, or I guess in more scientific terms, the longest fire on the planet. The longest burning fire, that is. A fire that hasn't stopped for possibly hundreds or maybe thousands of years. And specifically we're going to be talking about this one location in Australia where the fire has been going on for at least 6,000 years, but possibly even as long as 500,000 years, according to some scientists. And so let's talk a little bit more about this, and specifically let's discuss some of the details behind how all of this works, and of course how this might end in the future. Now first of all, here we're really talking about so-called natural fires. Fires that were not started by humans, or at least we don't think they were started by humans, and that mostly occurred by themselves. And this idea of eternal flame actually exists in several different cultures. For example, this right here is a picture of so-called fires of Chimera. The fires found in Turkey and that most likely have been burning for several centuries and possibly as long as 2,500 years. And these fires have been used by various cultures in various religious practices, but also have been used as a kind of a navigation beacon in the past. And these fires right here are generally powered by the methane present underneath the ground here, that's slowly seeping out and is essentially just burning away as it reaches the surface. And methane and a lot of other natural gases are one of two separate ways in which these fires can form. So these eternal fires are usually either gas related or are formed by various coal deposits, or coal seams as they're known, usually deposited several meters below the surface. But not all of these fires are natural. There's at least one located in Turkmenistan that was actually accidentally started by humans. And interestingly enough, some of these eternal fires literally started entire cultures. This right here, known as Yanar Dag, is one of many examples of these eternal fires present in Azerbaijan, the country we've discussed last year with a similar topic you might want to explore in the previous video. And it just so happens that the name of the country and of course the culture literally means the land of fire, with different types of eternal fire usually involved in different practices, ancient practices of their culture. But all of these fires so far sort of pale in comparison to the oldest fire on the planet, the one that's also used by one of the ancient cultures in their religious practices. Here we're talking about the Aboriginal cultures in Australia, and the fire itself is known as, well, it's actually named after the mountain. It's known as Mt Wingen, which in the Aboriginal language means fire, or the Burning Mountain, located in Australia, very close to Sydney, and it's basically right here. It's this patch you see in the middle. But there is no fire, meaning that there is no actually visible plasma on the surface, and that's because this fire at the moment is burning underground. However, it was visible when it was originally discovered back in 1829. As a matter of fact, when it was originally found, it was believed to be a discovery of a volcano, although within just a few years it was established that this was actually caused by large deposits of coal underneath the ground here. As a matter of fact, you can kind of see that there are quite a lot of different coal deposits everywhere. And even though I haven't really visited this location just yet, even though I plan to one day, apparently it's almost right away that you can feel that there is fire underneath. First of all because of the warmth, but also because of the smell, and also because literally everything around the spot has no vegetation or no life whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it becomes possible to even track where this particular fire came from and how long it's been traveling underneath the ground. Today, the analysis suggests that it's around 30 meters underneath the surface, and it's about 10 meters or so in diameter, so it's not really that large. It's also moving approximately 1 meter per year. And so by tracing back its location by looking at vegetation and by looking at various deposits on the surface, the previous geological analysis suggested that it's been traveling for roughly around 6,000 years at least. But some other scientists have suggested that it actually traveled even further, meaning that it's probably much older than that. But just like we've discovered in the last few hundreds of years, these types of fires are generally almost impossible to extinguish. As a matter of fact, there's a famous example from China where the government accidentally set the fire to one of the coal deposits in the ground, but then they've claimed to have extinguished it just to see it again a few years later, which means that they do deserve the name eternal fire. It's almost impossible to extinguish them until they run out of coal underneath. And there's a really famous example from the US, the small town known as Centralia, where the fire that accidentally started in 1962 have been burning ever since, and it's going to be burning for at least 300 more years, and has already caused the entire town to be abandoned. Last I heard, there's only about 5 people living there. And despite 3 different expensive attempts to extinguish all of this, as of today, all of these attempts have failed. But why exactly did all of this fail, and why can't we extinguish these fires? Which sort of relates to the idea of how these fires work. So unlike your typical fire on the surface, these coal seam fires essentially rely on coal itself that's already in the ground, which provides all of the fuel. And the fire itself usually occurs on the border of coal deposits, and all of the ground above it that usually contains a lot of different cracks and a lot of different holes, which normally form because of the temperatures underneath. And so because of the extreme heat inside and relatively cold temperatures on the outside, the ground ends up cracking, forming these really large holes that then, because of the circulation of air, provide all of the oxygen needed for the fire to continue. So it's basically a kind of a self-propagating process. And because of all of the dangerous pollutants produced in these fires, if these fires occur near a town, it becomes relatively dangerous to live in the vicinity, which is what happened in Centralia back in the 60s. Within just a few decades, the entire town had to be abandoned. And as I mentioned, the fuel for these fires comes from the coal underneath. For example, here's a picture from Nova Scotia in Canada showing us one of these many deposits. And coal by itself and its origins are an interesting topic in its own. It's still not entirely clear why so much coal was actually formed on the planet approximately 300 million years ago, but in essence, the vast majority of all coal we use today, and of course all of this coal burning in these various types of fires, was mostly produced from the sediments of ancient plants that existed on the planet a few 100 million years ago, that was then protected from oxidation and biodegradation by most likely being present in some sort of a swampy or bog-like area where the bacteria could not decompose it. And by being trapped here for millions and millions of years, in just the right pressure and just the right temperature, different types of coal eventually formed on the planet. And depending on the temperature and the pressure where all of this was happening, different quality of coal was produced as a result. The highest quality coal was apparently formed in relatively high temperatures around 200 degrees Celsius, the temperatures that lasted for several million years. This is generally referred to as the anthracite coal. Here's an example of what this usually looks like. And scientifically speaking, it's not entirely clear why most of the coal on the planet was actually formed in this one specific era and kind of stopped afterwards, or didn't actually stop, but decreased in both quality and quantity. So today this is actually one of the bigger mysteries. And so a lot of the coal that's burning underneath the Burning Mountain, and of course the one in Pennsylvania, both of them were most likely created around the same time a few 100 million years ago. But going back to that fire in Australia, well, it seems that it still has a lot of life left in it. But based on the observations of where it's most likely headed, it's most likely going to at some point hit a tiny river, or actually more like a creek, that's located nearby. And this will very likely create some sort of a surface fire for quite some time, and after this it might actually either disappear, which is at the moment unlikely, or potentially go underneath the river, come out on the other side and continue its path for another few thousands of years. And also, if by some chance this fire one day becomes even more intense, this obviously might create a bit of a problem for this nearby town right here, potentially forcing its evacuation as well. Although the chances of this happening in the next 100 years are pretty slim. Anyway, so that's basically the story of what we know so far about this longest fire on the planet, the longest burning fire. And although it's obviously not the fire we think of, it's more of a coal fire, it is nevertheless pretty interesting, and considering the fact that there are so many of them on the planet, finding the oldest one and seeing how it progresses and what effects it has on the nearby locations is very intriguing. And so that's pretty much the nutshell of what we know about this fire so far. I'm definitely hoping to one day visit this place and possibly some of the other eternal fires on the planet, but at the moment all I can do is explore them on Google Earth. And I guess for now, well, that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching, check out the links in the description below, maybe subscribe, maybe share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, and maybe come back tomorrow to learn something else. Maybe support this channel on Patreon by joining the channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.